I'd like to talk about is how I think Russian language service providers can sell in international markets. Because I think that's an interesting topic, and I think it's something that will happen. For a start, do we all think it's a good idea to sell outside of the Russian markets? Because it's a good question to start with. So what I will look at is why should you sell outside of the Russian markets? Where? And I would start with easy markets first. So in the UK I do three sort of things, but one of them is I work with the British government to help British exporters sell. And so I'm trying to think of it the other way around. And British exporters have an advantage in that they speak English. It can also be a disadvantage. I actually have a number of customers I deal with, and one said to me once, "But Doug, all my customers speak English. Even my international customers." And I said, "That's because you don't speak any other language, so you can only have customers that speak English." And I think most websites I see of translation service providers across the world have at least their own language and at least English. But we'll talk about that a bit later. So when I'm talking to exporters, I often say you should start with the easy markets first, and I'll define those. And then who. So who are you going to sell to, and who will do the selling? If you're a freelance translator, you have to do the selling yourself, maybe. How are we with the mic? Do I need to be close or further away? Can you hear me at the back? Maybe at the back you don't want to hear me, maybe you're tired. It's going to annoy you. And then what? What will you sell? Which services will you sell? How will you sell them? And perhaps when will you sell them? So we start off with some stereotypes. International markets, there are a lot of stereotypes. I'm sure you think every British person drinks tea, has an umbrella and wears a bowler hat. We travel to work in a red bus. All these things, it's all true. Pravda. Better. But unfortunately, there are stereotypes in every market. So there are some Russian stereotypes. That one, for a start. It's very well known, and people keep telling me I must understand vodka. I don't. But it's not good if you go into an Arabic market, because they don't drink. This guy. Stable government, that's what you'd call it, yeah? He's still in power, even though he's not, and he's probably going to win the next time, from what I hear. So, a stable economy, and a growing economy. We don't get leaders like him in the West. But actually, he speaks perfect German, I think. Niemiecki, no? That's what I've heard. And this, the Red Square marches and so on. And these seem like really silly stereotypes. But one thing I do notice is that the market economy is growing in Russia, and I think, if I may say this, younger people are more used to the market economy than older people. So some of the people I deal with in Russia who are running companies are younger than corresponding companies in the West. But when you deal with the West, you have the opposite. You have older people running companies, and older people still remember the bad old days, or whatever days you call them. Sputnik, I wanted to put a positive thing in there, because when I talk about negative things, there are also very positive things. Everybody knows the Russian education system produces people who are very bright, articulate, and very well qualified. So Russia has a good reputation for these things. And science and technology. Remember, you have a space program, the Americans don't. I never imagined that would happen. The Americans have got to use Russian spaceships. That's really cool, isn't it? These. So, you probably all know we have the car rally from Moscow to St. Petersburg. It was really good fun for me. We went to Tver and Novgorod. But I really wanted to travel in a Lada, because I'm a foreigner. But they said, "Niet." And this, RussianBrides.com. I've searched, there is no such thing as RussianHusbands.com. Okay, but barriers can be opportunities. because I think it's difficult for Western companies to deal with Russia. There are legal issues, there are language issues, there are distance issues, there are visa issues. There's the paperwork that seems to exist within Russia that they have a pleasure for. Any Arabic speakers here? No. This one? So Renato talked about this last year, about being blind or not being able to read. So I've been here 3-4 days, I don't remember how many, and I started to see the alphabet. I started to read Cyrillic easier and easier each day. So this is Arabic, clearly, and none of us can read it. It's a minor thing, but for a lot of Westerners, they look at Cyrillic, and even though it might be based on Greek, which shares a similar alphabet to Latin, it just confuses them. So I'm saying it's a barrier, but it means you as providers can help people over that barrier. That's what it means in Arabic, in case you're interested. So why do I think you should sell internationally? Because from what I've heard, the internal Russian market pricing is plохая. I want a word worse than plохая, dreadful, terrible. The prices are really low here, that's what I'm saying, from what people have told me. I heard, for example, that new students might be selling at 1 or 2 cents a word, euro cents. A new student in the dollar cents. Dollar cents. It's not student. It's less than that. Oh, I'm just going to go home now. This is awful, isn't it? So, in the UK, students would be paid more like the 5, 6, 7, 8 euro cents a word. So the pricing is, it's relative to the market, but as an international salesperson selling, I never sold anything less than, 20 cents a word, these sort of things. I would trick with the prices, I would use translation memories and do things to make the pricing look different, but these sort of single-digit figures, terrible. There are higher cost markets. I worked for Trados for a number of years, about 7.5, and Germany is next to Switzerland. In Switzerland, Trados was more expensive than Germany because the Swiss expected to pay more. They could just drive their car, buy Trados and drive back, and it's cheaper, but they expect to pay more. So my understanding of the Russian average salary is about 15,000 US dollars. Is that right? 15.5? Any average salary per year, 15,000 Russian. For 10 years, man. Well, averages are very interesting things. It depends whether you include Putin and these guys and the oligarchs that all buy English football clubs and expensive English houses. But there are obviously countries where the people get paid more. So therefore, if you go into those markets, it's a natural advantage because you're slightly cheaper and it means you can take advantage of their pricing structures. Some growth is easy. So I worked with one company, they translated their website into 6 languages, not a service provider. Interestingly, I find in the West, a lot of localization service providers are not translating their websites. I don't understand this, but they don't. But when British exporters translate their websites, they get sales they didn't expect. So I call them bluebirds, things that just fly in. So some international growth is easy, not all of it. It can be fun if you like traveling the world, if you like talking to clients from different countries. It's a good thing to do. And you can spread your risk, because you're probably aware there's a global crisis. That global crisis exists in most countries, but not all countries. So you can sell into different markets, and that can spread your risk. And different legal systems. I wanted to put that in a very nice way, but some of the owners of companies I've spoken to in Russia have told me that the government wants a lot of information if you grow the company. They expect things, that there can be barriers to business. In the UK, it's very easy to set up a business. Very easy. So sometimes it's easier for you to do business in other countries. So, for example, I know there are Swedish translators who are freelancers who have limited companies in the UK because it's very easy and very cheap to set it up, and it makes them look like an international player. I wouldn't know how to set a business up in Sweden. And different clients. You can have different clients from different industries or different clients from different countries. And when we looked at those figures yesterday for Common Sense Advisory, the Eastern European market is quite small. So the business is in North America and Europe, and Eastern Europe is 2.8, and Russia accounts for most of that. So there's just more opportunity everywhere else. So where should you start? This is just an idea. You can think whether you agree with it or not. But when I work with exporters, you start with markets that already understand you, already like you, already deal with you. So Russian-speaking markets, countries that speak Russian. Then we could look at CIS countries, and then Eastern Europe, and then countries that trade with Russia. I'm thinking of oil and gas. Countries that understand these sort of markets that are very important to Russia. Eastern Europe is an interesting one. Anecdotally, what I see is that the former, I don't know which word to use correctly in Russia, but the former Eastern Bloc countries went through a time, they tell me, when they wanted to go away from Russia. But now I see some of them starting to learn Russian because they realise it's a really important trading opportunity. So Russia itself is being accepted now more by some people in the former Eastern Bloc. I hope that's not offensive, but that's just what I've experienced. When should you do this? Well, Chats is always a good time, now. Because if you can do international business easy, you could start it and then see how it works. I mean, even if you're a freelance translator, you could have a website or a presence on the web in English and in Russian and see what happens with that. Because I bet if I search Russian language on Google in the UK, it's not a Russian translation company that comes up. It's probably an English or a British one. Opportunistic means that rather than saying I'm going to sell internationally straight away, maybe you go to the next conference, maybe you go to the next meeting, maybe you go on holiday and you meet somebody whilst you're there. So opportunistic is not strategic, but it's still business. I come from a sales background, not a marketing background. And in sales, we just need to get the figures. So we just sell when we can. Off-season peaks and troughs. So, for example, I used to sell mainly software localization. That's mainly in the American market. And what we're talking about is companies that have a year end in December. So my busy periods were always October to December. Now, I don't know if those peaks and troughs exist in the Russian market. Do they? They do. So maybe international markets could meet the other peaks and troughs for you. So that gives you effort to do it. Of course, remembering when you sell, it takes time to get the deal. So you have to figure out if it works that way. And slow background activity, just do something slowly each week. Which services are you going to sell? Personally, I think there's a lot of space for helping companies from the West understand and trade in Russia. Recently, there were two examples of quite negative things. Barclays Bank, a very large British bank, want to sell their branches in Russia. They want to pull out of Russia. And BNP Paribas are pulling out of Russia. There was the issue with Shell about, was it 4 years ago, when their operations were bought or taken from them in Russia. So these are very big companies, and when these big companies have trouble, the little guys that you could add value to are worried. So I don't know if it's possible, but you could look at saying, we can be your partner in Russia, we can help you in Russia, we can help you in Eastern Europe. Because what I see from exporters in the UK, for example, they find the Baltics less challenging than Russia. But look at the size of the markets in the Baltics. I have people that have trade missions to Latvia. Any Latvians in the audience? How many Latvians are there? So there's 2 million Latvians. And I know people who go on trade missions to Latvia who wouldn't go to Russia. So 142 million people or 2 million people? So there's a market barrier there. So what I mean by new services is thinking, how can I help customers sell in Russia? How can I help them grow? And then they will need your translation services. It's easier said than done, but it's an idea. The existing services, obviously, translation, interpreting, these sort of figures, and these sort of services. So when I deal with people who translate their websites, they say, well, I can translate my website into German, but what do I do when somebody calls me and they're speaking German? So maybe you can provide telephone interpreting, maybe you can provide web leads or translation of web leads, those sort of things with automated email reception. Existing services, we saw this yesterday from Common Sense Advisory, the presentation I gave. They list or they categorize 15 services. So think about those services and which ones you think would be more useful in different countries. And those are the growth ones. And this is interesting, business process outsourcing, so things other than translation. And we know the prices are dropping. I just thought I'd repeat this, that it's the German and French. So these are good markets. Any of you translating into French, freelancers? Do you sell direct to French companies or through... So you're only selling through translation companies. And any of the LSPs here, the larger companies, and how's France views as a market? Is it a big market? It's the second market for you, which is unusual. The experience I have is that the French market is quite difficult, because French tends to be lingua franca. Do you have good French skills? No, but the company has good French skills. Yeah. So I know a number of Russian companies that either have or are opening offices in Germany. When I say a number, I mean about 2. But my experience was that I used to sell into Germany a lot. So I would speak German the same way I speak Russian badly. And it was really useful because German people would feel sorry for me and put me through to the boss whenever I spoke bad German. And this we know that direct clients is growing. So the issue with having a direct client is they're more difficult to find. You have to service them, you have to look after them, so they're more expensive to find, but you can charge them more. And you can add value. You get referenceable clients you can say you're dealing with, you can put their logos maybe on the website. Who are you going to sell to? I would think direct clients, but it's much easier to sell to other LSPs because you know where they are, you can go to their conferences, it's much, much easier. But of course then you're dealing with a margin, and you have to let them make a margin. So when I see companies that are successful selling to other LSPs, they do it with technology, they do it with in-house staff. So I know one company and they trade on about a margin of 30% gross margin. The average gross margin, from what I've seen from most companies, is about 50 to 56%. You take the cost of the freelancer, you double it, you add desktop publishing, a bit of project management. So you have to have small margins if you deal with other translation service providers. But you don't have marketing costs, because they will do the marketing for you. It's easy to find translation companies through the associations, through the conferences, etc. Completely new clients is a very difficult thing, because where would you find them? And why would they deal with you? If you look at existing clients, one of the things people have told me is that often a Western company would start needing Russian translations, and they would be prepared to pay, in quotes, international prices. But then if they set up a Russian direct office, they employ Russians, and the Russians say, hey, you're not dealing with some American now, you're dealing with a Russian, I want Russian prices. So, is the reverse true? Can you think of a company that is either Russian or that is not Russian, that has international offices? You can go to them, and you can perhaps charge them somewhere in between Western and Russian prices. Of course, the cost of marketing to those people is more expensive, but it's possible. And who will sell? Is it your sales staff, if you have sales staff? Is it your production people? Because if you go to an LSP conference, then you can take production people, they can talk to each other, and they can probably agree some kind of vendor relationship for vendor management purposes. What I do see is sometimes with smaller LSPs, the owners, the managers, the senior people will do the selling. So they will go to the conferences, etc. And sometimes people have a domestic market where they sell maybe through the normal channels. So they don't, it's quite Reactive, they just sell, they've got existing clients. When they go international, then they have to make more effort. So the managing director or the owner gets involved in that. Sometimes people recruit new staff to set up an office in a different country. And that, I know, is very dangerous. It can work, but also it can go very wrong, because that new person maybe doesn't share your same values, and sometimes they will just set the office up, then change the name, and they have a company and you have no foreign office. I've seen that happen about 3 times. It doesn't always happen, but it's a risk. The advantage, of course, is that they can be focused on that market. I have seen people try to use agents internationally, where they've recruited people on a freelance or a part-time basis. You have to manage them really carefully, because again, they could sell to anybody. And sales partners are the people you could work with. They might be people who provide business services in the target country, and you might say to them, I'll help you with the language services for your clients. I don't see that working very often. It's something called wallet share, where if you have a salesperson selling services, and they can also sell your translation services, they'll probably sell theirs first and yours second. How do you sell? Reactive. By this, you don't want to, you can't go to all the conferences, you can't do these things, but you make it easier. How many people use Yandex? Okay, so how many people do what we call vanity searches? So you go into Yandex or Google and you type your name. Have you all done that today? No? And do you type your company's name? And do you have a Google alert on the company? Do you know what a Google alert is? So Google alert, a Google alert allows you to go to Google, type whatever you want, whichever phrase, and they will email you whenever that phrase appears on the indexing. Now, I don't know if Yandex does the same, but what I'd be interested in is how many people that have websites have done a search for their company in a different country. So you go to Google, rather than Yandex, and you type whichever country it is. So let's say .co.uk, it's a little rainy country somewhere between Europe and the US. We tend to do what the US says. If you just do a / and then NCR, so no country redirect, and you'll see if you appear in searches in the UK. Now, you probably don't, but that means people can't find you. So if you want people to find you more easily, translate into the language of the target customer, maybe host that website in the target country. So I was one of the fools that bought a Cyrillic domain name. And I have a Cyrillic domain name because I thought it was cool and exciting. I can't even access it in the UK because of spam filters and all sorts of other reasons. So I can FTP it, but I can't see it. So sometimes your web presence is not very visible in other countries. If you want to sell, clearly you have to have the language of their target market. But maybe think, does anybody have a website that's hosted in a different country? You have. Which country? You have it in the UK. You're Russian? Yeah? That's pretty cool. So do you have a Russian website in Russia as well? No. That's even cooler in a sense, because I deal with a lot of translators and I'm in associations, and I often say to them, so you have a website? Yes. And it's in English? Yes. You translate into English? Yes. But you translate from German? Yes. So your German customers have to read your English website to buy the services. Oh, I never thought about that. And I said, so what is it you sell? Translation. So I suggested them maybe they find, you often have somebody you know from the other language, the other pair. So their usual German contact, they translate their website into German, they translate their website into English. If you can host the website in the country, as you know, it means you will appear in the rankings much higher. And I believe it's easier to buy British websites than... I have a .ru website and a .rf, and it was okay, but it wasn't easy. So that's reactive. You just make your web presence available. So anybody on vContact here? I am, and I have only 7 friends. Aren't you a friend already? See, and I even know him for like 3 years and still no contact. So this is kind of a request. If you have a VKontakte account, please find me. I think there's only one Doug Lawrence, I think. Because every time I go, I've only got 7 friends. So it's interesting here, I see a lot of people using Facebook for business. And when I talk to British companies, they go, why would you use Facebook for business? If they're doing business marketing to consumers, they use Facebook. But business to business, they don't. Which is interesting. I try and encourage them to do it, because Facebook is very good for rankings. So make sure you have a presence. So LinkedIn, who has a LinkedIn account? Can I make a request that you just contact me on LinkedIn? Because LinkedIn too. I have, I think, 1,556 on LinkedIn, so a lot more than VKontakte here. But on Facebook, you can contact me on Facebook. So anybody have a LinkedIn company account? Yeah, so that's pretty good, because all those things help, that people can find you. And then you can join the groups on these things, like the forums, etc. So the other thing is make a clear message. Do you sell internationally? Do you have testimonials from international clients? That's a good idea. I always put my testimonials in both languages if I can, English and the language the customer is from, just because I like that sort of thing. But I think it helps because it shows you're international. Register with Google if you haven't already, as well as Yandex, because I don't know anybody in the West who searches in Yandex. Although Yandex is now going to Turkey, I believe, so it might change.